There's a bear in Washington state that tasted 36 cans of beer from a stolen campsite cooler, tried one brand, rejected it completely, and went back for more of the other until it passed out in the grass. Rangers found it sleeping next to the evidence. That story traveled around the world because it was funny. But it points to something that isn't funny at all. It points to something ancient, biological, and deeply unsettling about the nature of the minds that share this planet with us. We've spent centuries drawing a clean line between human consciousness and animal behavior. We reason, we seek, we alter our states intentionally. They don't. Except they do. And the evidence isn't anecdotal anymore. What you're about to hear is not a list of cute animal moments. It's a window into something much stranger. A pattern woven into the nervous systems of creatures separated by millions of years of evolution, all pointing toward the same thing. The search for altered experience is not a human invention. It may be one of the oldest drives in the animal kingdom. Let's start in Siberia, not with the reindeer, but with the snow. Picture a flat white silence stretching to every horizon, temperature so low that exhaling leaves a cloud in the air. And in the middle of that silence, a reindeer doing something that makes no evolutionary sense. It's digging. Not for food, not for safety. It's excavating through packed snow with focused, almost frantic energy, chasing something small and red. A mushroom. Amanita muscaria. The iconic red cap with white spots that you've seen in fairy tales without ever being told what it actually does. Amanita muscaria contains two primary compounds, muscimol and ibotenic acid. In high doses, ibotenic acid is toxic to humans and can cause seizures, severe nausea, and neurological damage. But muscimol, which ibotenic acid partially converts into during digestion, produces something else entirely. Intense visual distortions, altered perception of size and space, a sensation that objects are moving when they're not, a disconnection from the sense of where the body ends and the world begins. The reindeer doesn't experience this the same way a human would, and we don't know exactly what it experiences, but we know what it does afterward. It runs in tight, erratic spirals. It shakes its head violently and repeatedly. It separates from the herd with a kind of electric, directionless energy, as if the signal it's following is coming from inside rather than outside. And then it does it again the next time it finds the mushroom. The Evenki, the Sami, and other circumpolar shamanic cultures of Siberia and Scandinavia watched this for thousands of years. They weren't passive observers. According to anthropological records, some shamans consumed the urine of intoxicated reindeer deliberately because the animal's metabolism processed out the most dangerous compounds while allowing muscimol to pass through relatively intact. The reindeer functioned as a biological filter for a substance that could kill a human who miscalculated the dose. The flying reindeer image comes from somewhere. The exact origin is debated, but a red and white mushroom, an animal running in ecstatic spirals in the snow, observed by cultures that worshipped it as a spiritual guide, in a landscape so cold that chimneys and descent from above were a central part of survival and shelter. It's not proof, but it's harder to dismiss than it first appears. Now move south and east, out of the snow and into the dense heat of Madhya Pradesh, India, one of the world's largest legal producers of pharmaceutical-grade opium. Fields of Papaver somniferum stretching for kilometers behind fences and under official agricultural supervision. And in those fields, a problem that no scarecrow, no noise device, no conventional deterrent has been able to solve: the ring-necked parakeet, Psittacula cremeri, a bird known to every person who's ever lived near one as one of the loudest, most chaotic, most visually conspicuous creatures in nature. They arrive in groups, and when they arrive at the poppy fields, something happens that farmers find deeply unsettling, even after years of observing it. They go silent, completely, unnaturally silent. A group of parakeets moving through vegetation without making a sound is like watching someone speak with no audio. It triggers an instinct that something is wrong. They land on the poppy capsules before full maturity, when the latex inside is still raw and concentrated, and they bite into them with careful, measured pressure. Not to eat the capsule, not to take seeds, to extract just enough fluid. Then they fly to nearby branches and sit, still, eyes half closed, not preening, not vocalizing, not doing any of the things parakeets do. Just sitting. For hours. When farmers introduced new deterrents, the parakeets adapted, quickly. They changed flight patterns, timing, approach angles. The behavior wasn't instinct. It was learned strategy, updated and refined with the same cognitive flexibility these birds apply to everything else. A creature that cannot stay still for 30 seconds, choosing to sit motionless for hours, returning to the same source day after day, adapting its approach to preserve access. That's not foraging. That's something that has a name in behavioral science. And that name is compulsion. Stay with birds for a moment, because this story takes a different turn. In Central Europe, particularly in Bohemia in the Czech Republic, and across the northern United States and Canada every autumn, wildlife rehabilitators enter a period they recognize immediately. The calls start coming in. Birds flying into windows, birds on the sidewalk unable to take off, birds that you approach and they don't run because they can't properly assess where you are. The cause is almost always the same. Berries. Rowan berries, hawthorn berries, holly berries, and various others undergo natural fermentation as they freeze and thaw through early autumn temperature swings. The process is the same one humans use to produce ethanol, just uncontrolled and unintended. Bohemian waxwings, European starlings, robins, and cedar waxwings eat these berries in large quantities because they are abundant, calorie-rich, and accessible. They have no mechanism to detect fermentation before consumption, and no internal signal that tells them to stop before they've consumed enough to lose motor control. Entire flocks have been found grounded in the Czech Republic, literally unable to fly, crops full, feathers intact, simply waiting on the ground for the earth to stop tilting. The phenomenon is common enough that it has an informal name in English, and common enough that public guides exist for what to do if you find a drunk bird in your yard. The answer, in case you're wondering, is to put it somewhere safe and warm and wait. They recover. Then they go back to the same berries the next day. This is where the distinction becomes important. The waxwings aren't seeking intoxication. They're seeking calories, and they overshoot. But the result looks identical from the outside. Which raises a question that behavioral ecologists don't have a clean answer to. At what point does accidental intoxication become sought-after experience? The animals further along this list suggest the line is thinner than we assumed. The lemur of Madagascar stands right on that line. Lemur kata, the ring-tailed lemur, has been observed doing something classified under the term anointing, a behavior also seen in other primates. It picks up a millipede from the genus Secoleptus, bites it gently, and begins rubbing it across its fur with frantic, almost ritualistic intensity. The millipede, when disturbed, releases benzoquinones and other chemical compounds as a defense mechanism. In a mammal's skin, these produce a strong burning or tingling sensation and have confirmed antiparasitic properties. The functional logic is clear. The chemicals repel insects and parasites, and the behavior probably evolved for that reason. But watch the lemur's face while it does this. Primatologists have. There is something that does not look like discomfort. The salivation is intense. The eyes go unfocused. The movements become repetitive and rhythmic, in a way that looks less like grooming and more like the body chasing a sensation. And when you notice that lemurs compete actively for access to the millipedes, that they pass them between individuals as if they were a shared resource, that they seek the behavior out rather than stumbling into it, the anti-parasitic explanation starts to feel incomplete. Benzoquinones produce documented neurological effects in primates. What the lemur is doing may have started as pest control and become something else across generations. The body found a molecule that changed how the nervous system felt and built a behavior around returning to it. That's a story that runs through this entire list. It may be the oldest story in neuroscience. The capuchin monkeys of Venezuela, Brazil, and Costa Rica tell a version of that same story, except louder, faster, and in groups. Capuchins are famous for using stone tools to crack nuts, a behavior that requires planning, memory, and the ability to select the right tool for the task. The same cognitive architecture that makes them capable of tool use appears to have led them somewhere else entirely. Into social anointing rituals with plants from the genus Piper and, in some documented cases, with millipedes and other arthropods. What distinguishes the capuchins from the ring-tailed lemur is the collective dimension. This isn't one animal doing something unusual. It's entire groups, entering what researchers describe as frenzied sessions where animals rub each other vigorously with plant material, vocalize at increasing intensity, and compete openly for participation. The Piper compounds, including piperine, which is chemically related to capsaicin, have confirmed anti-parasitic effects. But the social nature of the behavior, the competition, the intensity, the seeking of repetition, leads primatologists to classify it as deliberate rather than incidental. The effect isn't a side product. The effect is part of what they're after. Somewhere in the evolutionary chain between that capuchin and a human sitting in a bar on a Thursday night, the math stays the same. Find a molecule that changes how the nervous system feels. Build a behavior around returning to it. Recruit others. Repeat. Now go to the American West, to the grasslands of Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado. This is where the story stops being interesting and starts being tragic. Locoweed, plants from the genera Astragalus and Oxytropis, grows throughout the western prairies and Patagonia in South America. It has purple or white flowers depending on the species. It looks completely ordinary. It is one of the most economically destructive plants in the livestock industry of North America, costing ranchers millions of dollars annually in horses and cattle lost to a compound called swainsonine. Swainsonine is an alkaloid that inhibits lysosomal enzymes in neural tissue. What that means in practice is that with repeated exposure, it causes irreversible neurological damage. The cells stop processing properly. The brain accumulates debris it can no longer clear. And eventually, the animal moves differently. Not with pain exactly, but with a disconnection from the physical world that is visible from a distance. Horses affected by locoweed are known as loco horses, and experienced ranchers can identify them by their gait before they get close. They move as though the ground beneath them isn't entirely real. What makes this a story about addiction rather than just poisoning is what happens when access is removed. Horses that have consumed locoweed repeatedly develop withdrawal symptoms when it's taken away. Circular pacing, loss of coordination, unpredictable behavior, progressive weight loss that continues even when food is abundant, as though the body has stopped trusting normal input. These are not the symptoms of an animal that accidentally ate something wrong. They are the symptoms of dependency. Physical, neurological dependency, documented in a horse on a roadside plant in the Texas grasslands. The brain changed. The brain remembered. the brain started demanding what it remembered. Cross the Atlantic to Madagascar, then fly north to Europe and east to India. But before that, go underwater. Because one of the most extraordinary cases in this entire conversation happens not on land, but off the coast of Mozambique, and in the waters around the Indochina coast, and in the Mediterranean. It involves bottlenose dolphins, and it was filmed. In 2013, documentary filmmaker John Downer captured footage for the BBC that generated immediate and heated scientific debate. Young bottlenose dolphins were passing a pufferfish between them, not hunting it, not eating it, passing it, with a gentleness and deliberateness that Downer and the marine biologists he consulted found difficult to explain as play. They were biting the fish with calculated, minimal pressure, causing it to release small quantities of tetrodotoxin, the same compound that makes improperly prepared fugu potentially fatal to humans. In high doses, tetrodotoxin blocks sodium channels in nerve cells and stops the heart. In microdoses, it appears to produce something different. A mild anesthetic or psychoactive effect that researchers haven't fully characterized. After manipulating the fish, the dolphins floated near the surface, mouths slightly open. Still, for minutes at a time. Bottlenose dolphins are not animals that float still with their mouths open as a baseline behavior. The fish was then passed to another individual who repeated the sequence, then another. The most significant detail isn't the effect, it's the transmission. The behavior was being shared between individuals in a sequence that implies it was learned, not instinctive. Cultural transmission of a behavior centered on a specific psychoactive source. That's a description that, applied to humans, we would call something very specific. Applied to dolphins, it remains technically open to other interpretations. But the precision of the dosing, the passing of the source, the collective return to the same behavior, these are not things that happen by accident. What the dolphins were doing is hard to explain without concluding that they knew, in some functional sense, what the pufferfish did, and that they wanted it. The Amazon offers the oldest version of this story. Deep in the rainforests of Brazil, Peru, and Colombia, indigenous shamanic cultures have used the vine Banisteriopsis caapi as the base of ayahuasca ceremonies for thousands of years. The vine contains harmine, tetrahydroharmine, and harmaline, all monoamine oxidase inhibitors with powerful neurological effects. And in those same forests, field researchers and indigenous guides have reported observing jaguars seeking out and chewing the leaves and stems of that same vine. What follows, according to field reports, is dilated pupils, slow and fluid movement, and a heightened sensory alertness that doesn't look like the normal alert state of a hunting cat. It looks like something different. The Amazonian shamanic tradition holds that the knowledge of ayahuasca didn't come from human experimentation. It came from watching the jaguar. The cat discovered it first. Humans observed the jaguar and followed. This claim cannot be verified scientifically, and Banisteriopsis caapi alone produces sedative and mildly visionary effects, but not the full visionary experience of ayahuasca, which requires an additional source of DMT that the vine doesn't contain. What the jaguar experiences is, with precision, unknown. But the behavior of seeking and chewing a specific vine that has no nutritional value, in a forest that contains millions of other plants, has been reported by enough independent observers to be taken seriously as a behavior that requires explanation. The jaguar, the animal that sits at the top of its entire ecosystem, the creature that indigenous cosmology across the Amazon places at the center of the spiritual world, eating the same plant the shaman drinks before he enters the vision. That's either an extraordinary coincidence or it's information. Now go to Tasmania, an island at the southern tip of Australia that produces approximately half of the world's legal opium for pharmaceutical use. Surrounded by water, regulated, fenced. And still, the wallabies get in. In 2009, Lara Giddings, then Attorney General of Tasmania, stated before the Australian Parliament that wallabies were breaking into opium poppy fields, consuming the plants, and then behaving in a way she described to Parliament with remarkable directness. They were running in circles and falling over. The behavior is consistent across species. Wallabies, kangaroos, and sheep that access the fields show the same post-consumption pattern. Increasingly tight circles, loss of balance, collapse. They lie on their sides. Then they get up and do it again. The detail that turned a parliamentary statement into a global headline was the observation that the circular paths these animals traced in the poppy fields were visible from the air. Perfect circles pressed into rows of cultivated plants. Looking, to anyone who didn't know the cause, exactly like crop circles. The mysterious formations that spent decades fueling theories about alien visitors and atmospheric phenomena and encoded messages from other dimensions. They were made by intoxicated marsupials stumbling in loops until they fell over. The full history of crop circle mythology, the conferences, the books, the television documentaries, the people who built entire belief systems around formations that turned out to be drunk wallabies, and, in many other documented cases, human hoaxers with rope and boards, is a story about how urgently the human mind seeks meaning in patterns. Even patterns made by accident. Even patterns made by animals that had no idea they were making them. Tasmania also gave us the inverse lesson, that sometimes the most mundane explanation is also the most accurate one, and that resisting it because it's mundane costs you the truth. The domestic cat lives in your house, probably on your furniture, and may be chemically dependent on a plant you can buy in any garden center. Nepeta cataria, catnip, produces a compound called nepentolactone that binds to opioid receptors in the feline brain and triggers a response that is, in behavioral terms, fully measurable and reproducible. Between 50 and 70% of domestic cats exposed to nepentolactone enter a state that includes intense rubbing, vocalization, salivation, and visible euphoria lasting between 5 and 15 minutes. After that window, there is a refractory period of approximately 30 minutes during which the cat shows zero response to the plant, regardless of how much is offered. Then the cycle resets. The 30 to 50% that don't respond are not defective. They simply lack the specific genetic receptor that makes the response possible. It's a variation in receptor architecture, not a variation in intelligence or sensory capacity. What makes this remarkable is that the receptor didn't evolve because of domestication. Lions, leopards, tigers, and pumas show an identical response. The receptor appears in animals that diverged from a common ancestor millions of years before humans domesticated anything. Nepentolactone probably evolved in the plant as an insect repellent. The fact that it also produces euphoria in all cats that carry the relevant receptor is, from the plant's perspective, an accident. From the cat's perspective, it is the whole point. The cat sits and waits for you to take out the bag. It knows what's in the bag. Cross to the American Southeast, to Florida, and to the northeastern coast of Australia, where the cane toad, Rhinella marina, now an invasive species in both places, has created a veterinary problem that required its own emergency protocol. The Sonoran desert toad, Encilius alvarius, native to the southwestern United States and northern Mexico, produces in its parotid glands two of the most potent psychoactive compounds documented in any living organism: 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine, known as 5-MeO-DMT, and bufotenin. 5-MeO-DMT is estimated to be between 4 and 6 times more potent by weight than standard DMT. A few milligrams, vaporized and inhaled, produces what most people who have experienced it describe as the most intense altered state of their lives, typically lasting under 20 minutes. Dogs lick the toads. Not once, repeatedly, deliberately. Veterinarians in Florida and in Queensland, Australia have specific protocols for treating dogs that arrive at the clinic with the presentation: severe drooling, disorientation, pupils fully dilated, potential seizures. The exposure is recognizable. The cause is identifiable. And the fact that some dogs return voluntarily to repeat the experience after recovery is documented well enough that guides for pet owners explicitly warn about it. The toad does nothing to provoke this. It doesn't attract, display, or position itself to be licked. It simply exists in a yard or a garden path, and some dogs, having encountered it once, search for it again. The brain registered the compound. The brain filed the location. The brain, in whatever way a dog brain processes priority and motivation, decided that returning was worth it. That's all addiction ever is. The brain registered something. The brain wants to return. Now come to the Mediterranean coast. Somewhere between the French Riviera and the Balearic Islands, a small silver fish with gold stripes is swimming in water so clear you can see it from a boat. Sarpa salpa, known commonly as the Salima porgy or dream fish. It looks unremarkable. It's eaten across the Mediterranean without incident most of the year. It is the only fish in documented medical literature to have caused auditory and visual hallucinations in humans who ate it. In 2006, 2 cases were reported in medical journals from the French Riviera. Both individuals ate Salima porgy prepared normally. Both subsequently experienced several days of hallucinations
that included animal sounds with no visible source, visual distortions, and a disorientation intense enough to require medical attention. The active compounds remain incompletely identified. Current research points to toxic phytoplankton that the fish consumes and bioaccumulates in its tissues at levels that vary significantly by season and by the specific waters where it feeds. There is a historical layer to this that sits in a more uncertain light. Classical sources, including ancient Roman texts, reference a fish from these waters consumed for psychoactive effect. Whether that fish was Sarpa salpa specifically, and whether the practice was as systematic as some accounts suggest, remains debated among historians of ancient pharmacology. The identification is plausible. The verification is incomplete. What is complete is the modern medical record. 2 people on the French Riviera, 2006, ate a common fish and spent days in a hallucination they did not choose and could not stop. The fish didn't do anything intentional, but it was the substance, not the consumer. In every other case on this list, the animal sought the molecule. Here, the molecule was the animal. That inversion is strange enough to sit with for a moment. The entire Mediterranean contains a fish that is, seasonally, a psychedelic, swimming in shallow water, completely indistinguishable by appearance from its non-psychoactive self. The sea keeps strange things. Most of them don't announce what they are. And then there are the elephants. An African elephant weighs between 3,000 and 6,000 kilograms. The mathematics of intoxicating an animal that size using naturally fermented fruit seem, at first consideration, impossible. The marula tree of southern Africa produces a fruit that ferments at roughly 3% alcohol after falling. The volume of marula fruit an elephant would need to consume to reach any meaningful blood alcohol level, given its body mass, seems to exceed what's available from fallen fruit in any given area. And yet, the debate in the scientific literature is not settled.
Elephant herds return to marula trees seasonally. They eat fallen, fermented fruit in quantities that observers consistently describe as preferential and active. After feeding, they exhibit behaviors that experienced wildlife observers classify as unusual. Stumbling in animals that move with extraordinary spatial precision under normal conditions. Increased vocalization, reduced inhibition, heightened aggression without clear provocation. The recent counterargument to the math problem is genetic. Studies have suggested that elephants may carry specific variants of the gene encoding alcohol dehydrogenase, the enzyme responsible for metabolizing ethanol, that significantly reduce their capacity to break it down compared to other large mammals. If the enzyme is less efficient, the threshold drops. The same volume of fruit produces a higher effective blood alcohol level than the body mass alone would predict. What is not in dispute is the behavioral pattern. Elephants know which trees are marula trees. They visit them in season. They compete for fermented fruit. If the effect is not what they're seeking, they have developed an extremely consistent and socially shared error of judgment that spans generations and multiple herds across different regions. At some point, the most parsimonious explanation for a repeated, learned, socially transmitted behavior directed at a specific seasonal food source that produces unusual effects is that the animal knows, in some functional sense, what it does. Not the way you know, not with language or concept or narrative, but with the body's deeper knowing, the kind that exists before language, before concept, before the part of the brain that names things, the part that simply records. This changed how everything felt. Go back, find more. That recording, that trace in the neural architecture, the pull back toward a specific experience, it turns out to be so old and so fundamental that it appears across species separated by hundreds of millions of years of divergent evolution. It appears in a bird in Bohemia eating frozen berries and a dolphin off the coast of Africa passing a fish. It appears in a horse in Texas that can no longer stop, and a cat in your living room waiting for the familiar smell. It appears in jaguars in the Amazon, following the same vine that the shaman drinks, and in reindeer digging through Arctic snow for a red mushroom that makes the ground feel like it's breathing. The search for altered experience is not a human invention. It is something much older, something that precedes us by epochs. We didn't create the drive to find what changes how consciousness feels. We inherited it. We inherited it from nervous systems that were doing this long before anything walked upright, long before anything had a word for what it was doing. The line we draw between human self-destruction and animal instinct is a line we drew ourselves. The chemistry on both sides of it is the same. The longing on both sides of it is the same. What differs is only the story we tell about why we do it. The animals don't tell a story. They just go back. And so do we.